In a quiet little neighborhood surrounded by gentle hills and perfectly trimmed lawns, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The streets were lined with houses that all looked similar: white picket fences, freshly painted doors, and flower beds bursting with color. It was the kind of place where people waved hello as they drove by and greeted each other warmly at the local grocery store. Everything seemed peaceful on the surface, but beneath this picture-perfect exterior lay a network of rules so strict that even the smallest deviation could spark outrage among the residents. At the heart of this rule-bound community stood Karen Thompson, the undisputed queen of the Homeowners Association, HOA. Karen wasn't just any ordinary HOA president. She took her role very seriously, perhaps too seriously. Armed with a clipboard and an unwavering determination to enforce every single guideline in the thick HOA handbook, Karen patrolled the neighborhood like a watchdog, from ensuring no one left their garbage cans out past 8 a.m. to inspecting holiday decorations for compliance with approved color schemes. Karen made sure everyone followed the rules without question. Most of the neighbors found her relentless, enthusiasm annoying but harmless. After all, her efforts kept the community looking tidy and well-maintained. Some even admired her dedication, though privately they joked about how she probably dreamed of HOA meetings instead of vacations. But despite her quirks, no one dared challenge her authority. Deep down, they knew crossing Karen meant endless letters, fines, and possibly being ostracized from neighborhood gatherings. So, they played along, keeping their homes immaculate, and their complaints to themselves. But everything changed when a new resident moved into the area. His name was Jack Reynolds, and he wasn't your typical suburban homeowner. A retired Army veteran in his late 60s, Jack carried himself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. He had spent decades serving his country, earning medals and accolades for bravery during some of the toughest missions overseas. Now, after years of sacrifice, he wanted nothing more than to live a simple life dedicated to honoring his family's legacy. Jack's arrival didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors whispered about him behind closed doors, curious about the man who seemed content to keep to himself. Unlike others who eagerly joined book clubs or hosted backyard barbecues, Jack preferred solitude. He rarely attended HOA meetings and politely declined invitations to social events. At first glance, he appeared to be just another retiree looking for a peaceful place to settle down. However, what set Jack apart was the small factory he purchased on the outskirts of the development, a weathered building tucked away behind tall trees. To Jack, the factory wasn't just a piece of property. It was a symbol of his father's hard work and craftsmanship. Decades ago, his dad had built the business from scratch, creating beautiful wooden furniture that adorned homes across the region. When his father passed away, Jack inherited not only the factory but also the responsibility of preserving its memory. Determined to breathe new life into the old workshop, he began restoring it bit by bit, filling it with tools and materials needed to revive the family trade. It didn't take long for Karen to notice something unusual happening near Jack's property. On one of her routine inspections, a task she performed religiously twice a week, she spotted smoke curling up from the direction of the factory. Intrigued and slightly alarmed, she marched over to investigate. What she found both puzzled and irritated her: piles of lumber stacked neatly outside, the hum of machinery echoing inside, and the unmistakable scent of sawdust lingering in the air. Karen wasted no time confronting Jack. She knocked firmly on his door, clipboard poised and ready. When Jack answered, she launched into a stern lecture about running a business in a residential zone, citing multiple violations from the HOA handbook. But Jack listened patiently, nodding as she spoke. When she finally paused for breath, he calmly explained that the factory predated the HOA's existence and fell under grandfathered zoning laws. He assured her that his operation posed no threat to the neighborhood. It was simply a way to honor his family's history. Karen wasn't convinced. To her, rules were absolute, and exceptions were unacceptable. Over the next few weeks, she bombarded Jack with official warnings, quoting obscure clauses and threatening legal action if he didn't comply. Yet Jack remained steadfast, refusing to back down. He believed in standing up for what was right, especially when it came to protecting his family's legacy. As tensions escalated, whispers spread through the neighborhood. Some residents sympathized with Jack, admiring his resilience and commitment to his craft. Others sided with Karen, fearing that bending the rules for one person might lead to chaos for everyone else. Little did they know, this clash between Karen and Jack would soon spiral into something far bigger and more dramatic than anyone could have imagined. For now, the quiet suburb continued its charade of perfection, unaware that beneath its polished surface a storm was brewing. And when it finally broke, it would change the lives of everyone involved in ways they never expected. Karen's obsession with enforcing the HOA rules was no secret. She lived and breathed them, treating the thick, leather-bound handbook like a sacred text. To her, the rules weren't just guidelines. They were commandments carved in stone, meant to be followed without question. So when she discovered Jack's factory humming with activity, it didn't sit well with her. In her mind, there was no room for deviation, no matter how small or harmless it might seem. The first time Karen approached Jack about the factory, she did so with her usual air of authority. Clutching her clipboard tightly, she marched up his driveway, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. When Jack opened the door, she wasted no time getting to the point. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, her voice clipped and formal. "I've noticed some unusual activity coming from your property. Specifically, I've seen smoke rising from the direction of that old building at the edge of your lot." Jack raised an eyebrow but remained calm. He invited her inside, offering her a seat at his kitchen table. Over a cup of coffee, he explained the situation. The factory had been in his family for decades, long before the neighborhood even existed. It was a place where his father had crafted beautiful wooden furniture, earning a reputation for quality and artistry. Now Jack wanted to bring it back to life as a tribute to his dad's legacy. "It's not a big operation," he assured her. "Just a few machines, some lumber, and a dream to keep my family's tradition alive." But Karen wasn't swayed. To her, the word factory conjured images of pollution, noise, and disruption, all things that went against the pristine image she worked so hard to maintain. She flipped through her clipboard, pointing out specific sections of the HOA handbook that banned commercial activities in residential zones. "I understand this is important to you," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But rules are rules. You're violating multiple clauses here, and I can't ignore that." Jack listened patiently, nodding occasionally to show he understood her concerns. But when she finished, he countered with logic of his own. He explained that the factory predated the HOA by several decades and fell under grandfathered zoning laws. These laws allowed existing structures to remain operational, even if they didn't align perfectly with newer regulations. "I've done my research," Jack said firmly. "This factory is completely legal. It doesn't pose any threat to the neighborhood, and it certainly doesn't violate the spirit of the HOA's mission." Karen frowned, clearly displeased. She hated being challenged, especially by someone who seemed so sure of himself. Determined to prove him wrong, she spent the next few days poring over documents, consulting lawyers, and even reaching out to city officials. Each time she thought she had found a loophole or a technicality, Jack countered with evidence of his own. It quickly became clear that he knew more about zoning laws than she did, a fact that irritated her to no end. As the weeks went by, their interactions grew increasingly tense. Karen began issuing formal warnings, delivering them personally to Jack's doorstep. Each letter was typed neatly on official HOA stationery, outlining alleged violations and demanding immediate compliance. Jack, however, refused to budge. Instead of caving to her pressure, he doubled down on his efforts to restore the factory. He hired local workers to help with repairs, installed new equipment, and even started experimenting with designs for his first batch of furniture. Word of their ongoing feud spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some residents sided with Karen, agreeing that businesses had no place in a residential area. They worried that allowing one exception would open the floodgates, leading to chaos and disorder. Others sympathized with Jack, admiring his determination to preserve his family's heritage. They saw him as a quiet hero, standing up to an overzealous authority figure who cared more about rules than people. Tensions reached a boiling point during the monthly HOA meeting. Held in the community center's cramped conference room, these gatherings were usually dull affairs filled with discussions about landscaping budgets and parking restrictions. This time, however, the atmosphere crackled with energy. Neighbors packed the room, eager to hear both sides of the argument. Karen took the floor first, presenting her case with practiced confidence. She waved copies of the HOA handbook in the air, quoting clauses and citing precedents. Her voice rose with each sentence, growing louder and more emphatic as she spoke. When it was Jack's turn to speak, the room fell silent. Unlike Karen, he didn't rely on theatrics or intimidation. Instead, he told his story simply and honestly. He spoke about his father's love for woodworking, the sacrifices he made while serving in the military, and his desire to honor his family's legacy. His words resonated deeply with many in the audience, who nodded in agreement or murmured words of encouragement. By the end of the meeting, opinions were divided. While some neighbors supported Karen's strict enforcement of the rules, others felt Jack deserved leniency. The HOA board promised to review the matter further, leaving both parties in limbo. For now, the factory remained operational, but the conflict showed no signs of resolution. Behind closed doors, Karen stewed in frustration. She couldn't understand why Jack wouldn't just give up. To her, the issue was black and white. Either he complied with the rules, or he faced consequences. But Jack saw things differently. To him, this wasn't just about following arbitrary guidelines. It was about protecting something meaningful, a piece of his past and a bridge to his future. As the standoff dragged on, Karen grew increasingly desperate. She began lobbying the HOA board members individually, trying to sway their opinions in her favor. She organized informal meetings, sent emails late into the night, and even drafted petitions urging stricter enforcement of the rules. Meanwhile, Jack focused on his work, channeling his frustration into creativity. The factory slowly transformed into a vibrant workspace, filled with the scent of fresh wood and the sound of saws humming in harmony. Neither of them realized that their battle was about to escalate in ways neither could have predicted. For Karen, it was a matter of principle, a chance to assert her dominance and reinforce the importance of order. For Jack, it was a fight for justice, a stand against what he saw as unnecessary bureaucracy, stifling individual freedom. Little did they know, their clash would soon attract attention far beyond the confines of their sleepy suburb. And so, the stage was set for a dramatic showdown, one that would test their resolve, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately change the course of their lives forever. Frustrated and feeling as though she was running out of options, Karen decided it was time to take drastic measures. She had spent weeks trying to reason with Jack, issuing warnings and rallying support from the HOA board, but nothing seemed to work. Jack remained unshaken, continuing his work at the factory with quiet determination. To Karen, this wasn't just about enforcing rules anymore. It had become personal. Her authority was being challenged, and she couldn't let that stand. One evening, after another fruitless meeting with the HOA board, Karen sat alone in her living room, staring at the stack of documents on her coffee table. She flipped through them absent-mindedly, her mind racing. Then an idea struck her, one so bold, so audacious, that it made her heart race. What if she bypassed all the back and forth and took direct action? If Jack refused to comply, why not simply remove the problem altogether? After all, she reasoned, the HOA existed to protect the community's interests, and if that meant demolishing a structure that violated their guidelines, then so be it. The next morning, Karen arrived at the HOA office with a plan. She called an emergency meeting with the board members, presenting her proposal with unwavering confidence. "We've given Mr. Reynolds every opportunity to comply," she said, pacing the room like a lawyer making her closing argument. "But he's ignored us at every turn. He's operating an illegal business in a residential zone, and it's our duty to enforce the rules. If we don't act now, what message does that send to everyone else?" Her words resonated with some of the board members, who nodded in agreement. Others looked uneasy, hesitant to approve such extreme measures, but Karen pressed on, painting a vivid picture of chaos and disorder if they allowed Jack to continue unchecked. "Imagine what happens if we let this slide," she warned. "Next thing you know, people will be turning their garages into nightclubs or opening petting zoos in their backyards. Is that the kind of neighborhood we want to live in?" Eventually, her persistence paid off. The board reluctantly agreed to hire contractors to demolish the factory, citing vague clauses in the HOA handbook that supposedly justified their decision. They assured themselves and each other that they were doing the right thing even though doubt lingered in the corners of their minds. On a chilly Saturday morning, while Jack was away attending a veterans reunion in a nearby town, the bulldozers rolled onto his property. The sound of heavy machinery echoed through the otherwise quiet neighborhood, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Workers surrounded the factory, cordoning off the area with bright orange tape. Within minutes, the first wall came crashing down, sending clouds of dust billowing into the air. By the time Jack returned home later that afternoon, the damage was done. He pulled into his driveway, expecting to find the familiar sight of his workshop waiting for him. Instead, he was met with devastation. Splintered beams lay scattered across the ground, shattered glass glittered in the sunlight, and the once proud structure was reduced to rubble. For a moment, he stood frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. His chest tightened, and a wave of nausea washed over him. This wasn't just a building, it was a piece of his soul, a tribute to his father's life's work. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some watched silently, their faces etched with sympathy. Others whispered among themselves, debating whether the demolition was justified. When Jack finally found his voice, it trembled with emotion. What happened here?" he asked, his eyes scanning the wreckage. One of the workers approached him, holding a clipboard. "Sir, we were hired by the HOA to demolish this structure," he explained matter-of-factly. "It's been deemed non-compliant with zoning regulations." Jack's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Do you have any idea what you've destroyed?" he demanded, his voice rising. "This wasn't just some random building. It was my family's legacy." The worker shrugged apologetically. "I'm sorry, sir. We're just following orders." Orders. The word echoed in Jack's mind, fueling his anger. He knew exactly who was behind this: Karen Thompson. Without another word, he turned and walked toward her house, his jaw set with determination. When Karen opened her door, she was surprised to see Jack standing there. Gone was the calm, composed man she had sparred with for weeks. In his place was someone visibly shaken, his eyes blazing with a mix of grief and fury. "How could you do this?" he demanded, his voice low but laced with intensity. "You didn't just destroy a building. You destroyed something irreplaceable." Karen hesitated, caught off guard by the raw emotion in his tone. For a brief moment, guilt flickered across her face, but she quickly masked it with defiance. "I was enforcing the rules, Jack," she replied, her voice steady but lacking its usual confidence. "You left us no choice." "No choice?" Jack repeated incredulously. "You bulldozed my property without giving me a chance to defend myself. That's not enforcement, that's tyranny." The confrontation drew a small crowd of neighbors who watched silently from a distance. Some sympathized with Jack, while others sided with Karen, but all were captivated by the drama unfolding before them. As the argument escalated, tempers flared and voices grew louder. "You think this is about me?" Jack continued, pointing to the ruins of his factory. "This is bigger than both of us. It's about fairness, about respecting people's rights. What gives you the authority to decide what stays and what goes?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, but stopped short. For the first time, she faltered, unsure of how to justify her actions. Deep down, she knew she had crossed a line, but admitting it would mean acknowledging her own mistakes, and that was something she wasn't ready to do. That night, Jack sat alone in his living room, staring at the photographs lining his walls. Each one told a story, his father standing proudly beside his first finished piece of furniture, his mother smiling as she polished a wooden table, His siblings gathered around during holidays spent in the workshop. These memories weren't just his, they belonged to his entire family. And now, thanks to Karen's actions, they felt irreparably damaged. But Jack wasn't the kind of man to wallow in despair. Over the years, he had faced far greater challenges, both on the battlefield and off. This was just another obstacle, albeit a deeply personal one. As he sat there, a plan began to form in his mind. He wouldn't let Karen win, not this time. He vowed to fight back, not just for himself but for anyone else who might fall victim to unchecked power. Little did he know, his battle was about to take a turn neither he nor Karen could have anticipated. The demolition of his factory had sparked outrage far beyond their sleepy suburb, drawing attention from local media and igniting a conversation about the balance between rules and compassion. And as the spotlight grew brighter, secrets long buried would come to light, forcing both Jack and Karen to confront truths they never saw coming. The demolition of Jack's factory quickly became the talk of the town. Neighbors whispered about it over coffee. Children asked their parents why bulldozers had torn down the old building, and even local businesses couldn't resist gossiping about the dramatic feud between Jack and Karen. Word spread like wildfire, and soon reporters from nearby newspapers and TV stations caught wind of the story. Sensing an opportunity for a juicy human interest piece, they descended upon the quiet suburb, eager to uncover the truth behind the rubble. Karen found herself at the center of the media storm. Cameras appeared on her front lawn. Microphones were thrust into her face and questions came rapid fire. Why did you order the demolition? Do you regret your decision? How do you respond to accusations of overreach? At first, she tried to maintain her usual air of authority, delivering rehearsed statements about enforcing HOA rules and protecting neighborhood standards. But as the scrutiny intensified, cracks began to show in her polished exterior. Her voice wavered, her answers grew shorter, and her frustration mounted with each interview. Jack, on the other hand, handled the attention with grace and dignity. When reporters approached him, he didn't lash out or seek revenge against Karen. Instead, he shared his story calmly and honestly, allowing his emotions to shine through without overshadowing his message. He spoke about his father's passion for woodworking, the sacrifices his family had made, and the deep personal meaning behind the factory. His words resonated deeply with listeners, who saw him not just as a victim of bureaucratic overreach, but as a symbol of resilience and integrity. During one particularly heated exchange outside the remains of the factory, a reporter turned to Jack and asked if he planned to take legal action against the HOA. The question hung in the air, heavy with anticipation. For a moment, Jack paused, his expression thoughtful. Then, with quiet determination, he revealed something that would change everything. You know, he began, his voice steady but carrying a weight that silenced the crowd. This isn't just about me or my property. It's about fairness, accountability, and ensuring that no one else has to go through what I've experienced. He took a deep breath before continuing. What many people don't realize is that I'm not just a retired veteran trying to rebuild my family's legacy. Decades ago, I served as a state senator, and during my time in office, I authored several key pieces of legislation governing homeowners associations, including the very laws this HOA claims to uphold. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd, and cameras flashed furiously as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Even Karen, standing a few feet away, looked visibly stunned. Her clipboard slipped from her hands, clattering to the ground as she struggled to process what she had just heard. Jack went on to explain how he had championed reforms aimed at preventing abuses of power within HOAs, advocating for transparency, due process, and protections for homeowners. These laws were designed to ensure that HOAs operated fairly and responsibly, not as tools of oppression. Yet here he was, decades later, facing the very kind of injustice he had worked so hard to prevent. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Reporters pressed Jack for more details, asking how it felt to be targeted by an organization operating under rules he himself had helped create. It's disheartening, he admitted, his tone measured but tinged with sadness. But it also reinforces why these laws are so important. No system is perfect, and there will always be individuals who misuse their authority. That's why we need safeguards, so people can stand up for themselves when things go wrong. As the interviews continued, the narrative shifted dramatically. What had started as a local dispute between a stubborn homeowner and an overzealous HOA president transformed into a national conversation about power, privilege, and the importance of checks and balances. Social media exploded with reactions, hashtags like Talk Justice for Jack and the HOA reform trending across platforms. Supporters flooded Jack's inbox with messages of encouragement, while critics lambasted Karen and the HOA for their actions. For Karen, the fallout was devastating. Overnight, she went from being a self-appointed enforcer of community standards to a villainized figure mocked online and vilified in headlines. Memes featuring her face circulated widely, accompanied by captions, like "Karen strikes again and when rules go too far." Protesters showed up outside her house holding signs that read, "Stop HOA tyranny" and "Rules without compassion hurt real people." Strangers called her names, left angry voicemails, and even sent hate mail. The pressure became unbearable, and Karen retreated from public view, avoiding interviews and canceling appearances at HOA meetings. Meanwhile, Jack embraced his newfound platform, using it to advocate for meaningful change. He gave interviews to major news outlets, wrote op-eds for national publications, and participated in panel discussions about housing rights and HOA reform. Rather than seeking vengeance, he focused on education, urging communities to prioritize empathy and understanding over rigid adherence to rules. "We all want safe, beautiful neighborhoods," he said during one televised interview. "But we have to remember that behind every rulebook are real people with real lives. If we lose sight of that, we risk losing our humanity." Despite the dumb chaos surrounding them, Jack extended an olive branch to Karen. During a live broadcast, a reporter asked if he harbored any resentment toward her. Jack shook his head firmly. "I don't hate Karen," he said. "In fact, I feel sorry for her. She got caught up in something bigger than herself, and now she's paying the price. My hope is that this experience teaches her, and others, like her, the importance of listening, learning, and growing." His words struck a chord with viewers, including Karen herself. Watching the interview from her living room, she felt a pang of guilt sharper than anything she'd experienced before. For weeks, she had convinced herself that she was doing the right thing, that enforcing the rules justified her actions. But hearing Jack speak so compassionately, even after everything she had done, forced her to confront the truth. She had let her ego and need for control blind her to the human cost of her decisions. Determined to make amends, Karen mustered the courage to visit Jack at the site of the demolished factory. The area was still littered with debris, but volunteers had begun cleaning up, sorting through the wreckage in preparation for rebuilding. Jack was overseeing the effort, directing workers and offering guidance where needed. When he spotted Karen approaching, his expression softened but remained guarded. "Jack," she began, her voice trembling. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I never meant for things to go this far. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I see now that I was wrong. You didn't deserve what happened to you, or your family's legacy." Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke, and for the first time, Jack saw vulnerability in the woman who had once seemed so unshakable. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her apology. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "It takes strength to admit when you're wrong. I appreciate your honesty." Though trust wouldn't come easily, Jack agreed to let Karen help with the rebuilding efforts, a gesture of goodwill that marked the beginning of a fragile reconciliation. Together they worked side by side, sifting through rubble and laying the foundation for something new. It was slow, painstaking work, but it symbolized more than just the restoration of a building. It represented a chance for healing, forgiveness, and growth, for both of them. And as the sun set over the neighborhood that evening, casting long shadows across the scarred landscape, it was clear that this story was far from over. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with lessons yet to be learned and bridges yet to be rebuilt. But for the first time in a long while, there was hope, a glimmer of light shining through the cracks of a broken system, reminding everyone, involved that even in the darkest moments redemption is possible. The story of Jack Reynolds and Karen Thompson exploded far beyond the confines of their quiet suburban neighborhood. What had started as a local dispute quickly snowballed into a national sensation, capturing the attention of millions. Social media played a pivotal role in amplifying the drama, with hashtags like #DiesterJustice4Jack and #DiesterKarenGoneWild trending for days on end. Memes mocking Karen's overzealousness flooded platforms like Twitter and Instagram, while heartfelt posts praising Jack's resilience and dignity inspired countless users to share their own stories of HOA struggles. News outlets couldn't get enough of the unfolding saga. Talk shows invited experts to debate whether HOAs had become too powerful, while morning news programs featured segments about balancing community rules with individual rights. Even late-night comedians weighed in cracking jokes about clipboard-wielding Karens and bureaucratic overreach. The public was captivated, not just by the spectacle but by the deeper questions it raised about fairness, authority, and accountability. In the midst of this whirlwind, Jack remained remarkably composed. Despite the overwhelming attention, he never sought to exploit the situation for personal gain or revenge. Instead, he used his platform to shine a light on systemic issues within HOAs, advocating for reforms that would protect homeowners from abuse. His calm demeanor and unwavering commitment to justice earned him widespread admiration. People saw him as more than just a victim. They saw him as a leader, a voice of reason in an increasingly polarized world. Karen, on the other hand, found herself at the epicenter of ridicule and scorn. Once revered, or at least tolerated, as the self-appointed guardian of her neighborhood's standards, she now became a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked authority. Protesters gathered outside her home daily, holding signs that read, "HOA bully and rules without heart." Strangers shouted insults from their cars as they drove past, and anonymous callers left threatening messages on her voicemail. Online trolls dissected every detail of her life, posting screenshots of old social media posts and speculating about her motives. The pressure took its toll. Karen withdrew from public life, avoiding neighbors and skipping HOA meetings altogether. She stopped patrolling the streets with her clipboard, no longer interested in enforcing the very rules she had once championed so fiercely. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves, uncomfortable being associated with someone who had become a lightning rod for criticism. For the first time in her life, Karen felt truly alone. Behind closed doors, she grappled with guilt and shame. At night, she replayed the events leading up to the demolition, questioning how things had spiraled so out of control. Had she let her obsession with rules blind her to the human impact of her actions? Could she have handled the situation differently? These thoughts haunted her, keeping her awake long after everyone else had gone to bed. Meanwhile, the backlash against the HOA board reached fever pitch. Residents demanded answers, calling emergency meetings to discuss what had happened and how to prevent similar incidents in the future. Several board members resigned under pressure, citing the stress and scrutiny as reasons for stepping down. Those who remained scrambled to distance themselves from Karen, issuing public apologies and promising sweeping changes to the organization's policies. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected began to emerge: a growing movement for reform. Inspired by Jack's advocacy, homeowners across the country started speaking out about their own experiences with HOAs. Stories poured in from all corners: families forced to repaint their homes because of non-compliant colors, retirees fined exorbitant amounts for minor infractions, and small business owners shut down due to arbitrary zoning disputes. It became clear that Jack's case was not an isolated incident, but part of a much larger pattern. Recognizing the momentum building around the issue, Jack decided to take action. He drafted a proposal for statewide legislation aimed at curbing HOA abuses and presented it to local lawmakers, dubbed the Fair Housing Accountability Act. The bill called for greater transparency in HOA operations, mandatory mediation processes for resolving disputes, and penalties for violations of homeowners' rights. It also included provisions to strengthen grandfathered zoning laws, ensuring that properties like Jack's factory could not be demolished without proper legal justification. The proposal garnered widespread support, drawing endorsements from civil rights groups, veterans organizations, and housing advocates. Lawmakers praised Jack's efforts, applauding him for turning a personal tragedy into an opportunity for meaningful change. Public hearings were held to gather input from residents, and testimonies poured in from people eager to share their stories. Many spoke emotionally about the toll HOA conflicts had taken on their lives, while others expressed gratitude for Jack's courage in standing up to injustice. Karen watched these developments unfold from the sidelines, unsure of where, or if, she fit into this new narrative. She admired Jack's ability to channel his pain into purpose, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't deserve redemption. Still, something inside her stirred, a faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to make amends. One day, driven by a mix of guilt and curiosity, Karen attended one of the public hearings. Sitting quietly in the back of the room, she listened as speaker after speaker recounted their struggles with HOAs. Some shared stories eerily similar to Jack's, while others described lesser-known injustices that nonetheless left lasting scars. As the hours passed, Karen realized how little she had understood about the broader implications of her actions. Her focus had always been on maintaining order within her immediate community, but she had never considered the ripple effects of rigid enforcement. When the hearing concluded, Karen lingered behind, hesitant to approach anyone but desperate to say something. Finally, she mustered the courage to speak to Jack, who was chatting with supporters near the exit. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want you to know I'm listening, really listening, and I want to help." Jack studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "That's a start," he said simply. "We can't undo what's been done, but we can work together to make sure it doesn't happen again." Over the following weeks, Karen threw herself into the reform movement, attending meetings, volunteering her time, and even testifying before lawmakers about the need for change. Her involvement surprised many, including herself, but she found solace in the idea that she might use her experience to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Though trust would take time to rebuild, her willingness to confront her mistakes earned her a measure of respect from those who had once dismissed her as irredeemable. Back in the neighborhood, attitudes began to shift. Residents who had previously feared or resented Karen started seeing her in a different light, recognizing her efforts to right past wrongs. Slowly but surely, bridges were rebuilt, conversations restarted, and wounds began to heal. The HOA itself underwent a transformation, adopting new guidelines that prioritize compassion over control and emphasizing collaboration over confrontation. Through it all, Jack remained a steady presence, a guiding force for both his community and the wider movement he had sparked. He continued working tirelessly to pass the Fair Housing Accountability Act, traveling across the state to rally support and educate others about the importance of fair housing practices. Along the way, he forged unlikely alliances, including one with Karen, whose journey from antagonist to advocate served as a powerful reminder of the potential for growth and redemption. And so, what had begun as a bitter feud between two neighbors evolved into something far greater, a catalyst for change that touched countless lives and reshaped the conversation around homeowners' rights. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, fraught with obstacles and setbacks. But for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of optimism, a belief that even the most entrenched systems could be reformed when people came together with courage, empathy, and determination.